Hey, this is Mrs. Stubbs. I'm going to talk about the literary elements for this week's quiz. The first one that you have on the list is jargon. Jargon is the word that we use mostly when we talk about the technical speak of a particular discipline. Whether you're talking about medical jargon or educational jargon or engineering jargon, every study or even career has its own language for its own technical terms. It also then is used in a negative connotation for any type of written expression that is overly technical. So, if you're trying to use really big words to say something very simplistic, you might argue that there's way too much jargon. Just get to the point. Okay? A juxtaposition, I love this. It's also a verb. You can talk about how a writer juxtaposes. But a juxtaposition is the placement of two images very close together. And your definition talks about it being for the purpose of comparison or contrast, but I would take it a step further to argue that the placement of those two images right next to each other typically create something that they don't have by themselves. In other words, the one that I usually, when I teach this to freshmen, it comes up in one of the chapters during Night by Elie Wiesel. And there's a part of the book, hopefully you recall, where he has just witnessed the hanging of a child. And he talks at the very, very end of the chapter, he makes some references or some reference to the inhumanity of something. And in the very next sentence, he says, "I was just 15." And they're two unrelated sentences. I mean, the fact that he was 15 in any other situation would have nothing to do with what he's talking about. But the juxtaposition of those two thoughts, of those two images, create something entirely different. He didn't get very, specific and say, how could only a 15-year-old have witnessed something so inhumane? Instead, he very bluntly and directly describes what happened. Period. Next sentence, I was just 15. And that is a juxtaposition. It's not just two different images or symbols put next to each other. Often, in my opinion, it happens when there's some effect that's created by the two of them next to each other. Okay? All right. Leitmotif is really confusing because you've got the word motif. And everybody already has a hard enough time trying to keep the difference between a motif and a symbol straight, and now we're throwing in a leitmotif. Okay. A leitmotif got its start in opera because it was a piece of music, usually a short melody that was associated with a particular character. So, for instance, in a lot of horror movies, there's a particular sound or musical whatever composition, but it's usually short to represent a particular character. In Jaws, there's a very recognizable music that's put on when the shark is coming, and so on. And it started being used in literature as well. How was it used in literature? Well, it's when you've got a motif that's loosely associated with a character. So I think that the definition we have here is a little bit confusing. I would like you to even amend it so that you've got an intentional and recurrent repetition of a word, phrase, situation, or idea that is loosely associated with a character and tends to unify the literary work. The leitmotif, the light coming from German, it means the lead motif. But it doesn't have to be the biggest, motif or the most important motif. It's typically the one that's associated with a character. Some characters are always associated with particular things. A Midsummer Night's Dream, the fairy court is always associated with the moon. You might want to look at what motifs tend to crop up when a particular character is present in Gatsby. Okay? That's what I want you to think of when you think of light.